Hey everyone, back for another edition of That's Our Two Satoshis Live, where we talk about what's happening in the digital asset market. Obviously, last week, end of the summer, kind of slow from a trading volume standpoint. Not a lot of people are around. So I had the pleasure of picking the brain of the rest of the ARCA team and figure out what are they thinking about, what are they seeing in the market. And I'm on today with one of our, I don't know, maybe one of our newest members, maybe not that new anymore, actually been here for a while, but Joey Reinberg. And he has some pretty interesting commentary about Solana and Ethereum and sort of the future of crypto. But before we get to that, as always, a quick disclaimer. For those who want to read the actual blog instead of just listening to us talk, you can always find it on our website, ar.ca/blog. So Joey, like I said, normally I talk a lot about kind of what's happening on a week-to-week basis, what's happening with crypto prices, what's happening with markets. I'm going to give a shout out to you and to other members of ARCA on the research and portfolio team, kind of talking about what's interesting. And I thought what you said maybe resonated the most with me or stuck out the most, sort of an independent thought piece about where we're headed in terms of Solana usage versus Ethereum usage. And I guess my first question, maybe explain to the audience here kind of what you're thinking. And then as you do that, what I'm really interested about, is this something you've been thinking about for months, or has it really been driven by sort of more recent events and activity and usage that you're seeing throughout both ecosystems?
Yeah, so first I would say there's two different approaches to scaling blockchains, and Ethereum and Solana take two very different approaches. The Ethereum ecosystem takes like a L2 scaling approach of launching different chains on top of Ethereum and then settling down back to Ethereum. On Solana, they take a more integrated approach where everything happens all on one chain. And to answer the second part of that question, I would say this is not something that's been relatively new in my thinking. I think this has been since Base launched, and you kind of saw the activity and hype around the Farcaster ecosystem with it, and as well as like with Zora and a lot of these NFTs minting on it, and the rise of consumer crypto, especially on Base. That this is not something. I think this has kind of been a phenomenon that's been going on for around 6 months, at least, and is something that I wanted to highlight for everyone this week.
Perfect. So with that said, let's talk further about what you actually wrote here. And for those who want to actually read the blog, we've actually wrote about 4 or 5 different things this week, sort of a data dump of just things on our mind, everything from what actually does it take for a token to become a real winner in a market, some great insights from Nick Coates, who's been on the show many times, talking about the different factors that usually lead to a big outsized upside performance in tokens. A couple of them may even surprise you, related to whether or not they've been big winners before, whether or not they have high inflation or low FTV. Also, Mihao on the venture side talked a lot about stablecoin dominance and sort of the rise of Athena, as well as the new makeover at MakerDAO, as well as what's happening over at PayPal. But I thought most interesting was looking at really just the title of what you wrote, Joey, probably grabbed me more than anything, which is the future of Ethereum is Coinbase, but the future of crypto is Solana. And maybe go into a little more detail about what that, like, is that an outlandish statement? Is that a, something to grab headlines, or do you really believe in 5 years that that is going to come to fruition?
Well, I really think that the like leader in the L2 landscape and what they're building at Coinbase with Base is really something that like separates them from all the other L2 competitors. Out there, you have Optimism, Arbitrum, Blast, Manta, and all these other like new L2s that are popping up, and they're essentially all the same product. But what differentiates them is whether they're like Optimistic or ZK, which is like kind of more advanced, but they're really all the same thing. And what separates them is the developer ecosystem, the support they have behind it. And with Base specifically, they offer passkey integration for better wallet integration for consumer dApps. They offer APIs for easier building for like developers. They also offer the liquidity from Coinbase, the exchange, to be brought down into Base. And all of these different things allow for Base to kind of lead that L1 or L2 development. And I think eventually a lot of these different chains that are launching on Ethereum will be their own app chains. But in terms of an all-in-one L2 ecosystem, I really think Base has separated itself, just having Coinbase behind it.
But that's sort of, maybe a little antithetical in terms of, you know, regardless of how, you always hear about these different communities, Solana versus Ethereum or any other layer one. And historically, one of the answers, a lot of them are always, more subjective than objective, right? A little more infighting, and people just have with their own opinions based on their own bias. But one that was always, at least more objective was that Ethereum is more decentralized than Solana. And even if you couldn't hang your hat on anything else, you would at least say if you care about its decentralization, you would probably flock towards Ethereum. If you care about speed and usability, but don't care about decentralization, you'd flock towards Solana. What you're saying now, tying Ethereum to Coinbase, I don't know how that gets viewed by the Ethereum community. I'm not even sure, is this a unique thought, or is this now kind of out there? Is there a world where the Ethereum community says, you know what, even if that's true, the benefits that Coinbase brings from all the things you mentioned in the blog, and all the things you just mentioned here with regard to their user base and the APIs, is that enough to make the decentralization argument no longer relevant? Or am I overthinking this, and just because you're tied to Coinbase's success doesn't really mean you're any less decentralized?
Yeah. So right now they don't have an L2 token, which is what eventually I think will lead them towards decentralization, as well as they've kind of highlighted a path with the Optimism superchain to lead to a more decentralized chain. But that is correct. Right now, Base is a relatively centralized chain, which is an issue in the short term, but they do have plans to decentralize in the long term. And as well as with Solana, as Solana grows and more nodes are developed, it will become more decentralized. The argument was always that it was more expensive and more difficult to run a validator on Solana, which versus Ethereum, which is why there's much more validators for Ethereum, making it more decentralized. But as Solana grows, and I feel like that's kind of an issue of the past and kind of like a false argument to kind of go against the Solana community.
Okay. So when you look at, and you put some great charts in the blog as well, talking about how, in my opinion, maybe that's not even an opinion, maybe it's just factual based on revenues and users, Base is clearly the dominant L2 now on the Ethereum ecosystem, right? I think it's hard to really refute that. And with that, the question is, especially given that you have both, some developer chops in addition to your finance acumen, is Base an easier developer experience, or is it simply nothing else matters other than this defined and integrated user base and APIs that Coinbase already offers?
Yeah.
What I'm basically saying is put your head inside. Obviously you've written code yourself as well, but like put yourself inside of any new developer looking to build on blockchain. How easy of a decision is it to go to a Solana versus a Base versus something else?
Yeah, so the first initial difference is the Ethereum virtual machine versus the Solana virtual machine. The Ethereum virtual machine is written with Solidity, which is a more JavaScript like language. And then Solana is written in Rust, which is a more advanced language that I think personally is harder to develop with. So that's the first differentiation between what you would do. And then if you decide to go with the Ethereum virtual machine, you're kind of deciding between the L1 or the L2s. And what that comes down to is a lot of the time grants from the chain itself, and as well as like the use case you have if you need cheaper fees or faster block time. So most of the real legitimate use cases are going to need to be built on an L2 because you need cheaper fees for end users. And then in terms of development, it's the reason Coinbase made it so easy is they released all these developer tools to use with Base that just lowers the amount of development time that's needed for developers to really build these new and innovative consumer apps. And so I think that's kind of the differentiation, and it really comes down to Rust versus Solidity as the programming languages.
Got it. You said, you also mentioned, in making a decision with an L2, I think the market is speaking there, right? I mean, am I oversimplifying to say that the market, that at this point, developers really aren't making a lot of decisions with regard to L2s? If they're going to build an EVM compatible app, they're doing it through Base, or is there still healthy competition from your Optimisms and your Arbitrums and some of the other layer twos? Or in your opinion, is that race over and this is just, any graph that shows Base, leading right now is going to be, you're not even going to be able to read it in 3 years because the Base numbers are just off the chart?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the time grants from the community itself. If you're a developer and you're trying to build something new and innovative and Arbitrum's willing to give you $10 million to build it out on their chain, a lot of the time developers are not going to not take the money. But if it's completely fair and just based on what's easier and best for a developer to actually build the app out, I really think Base is the chain to be on and the one that will win out in years to come.
Yeah, and the reality is some of this is a moot point in the sense that, it's not like if you're building traditional, Web 2 apps or your traditional, Android or iOS apps. It's rare that people are having this discussion, right? They might have to choose which one they're going to build first, right? Are they going to build an iOS app first? Or are they going to build an Android? But the reality is they're going to do both eventually, right? If you have a successful product and a popular product, you're ultimately going to be on every operating system. And I think the same thing ultimately holds true for crypto. The problem has been there just haven't been that many successful apps, right? Those that have been successful have all gone multi-chain. So
is the prime example of that. Like they're the second leading DEX on Base, but they're across every EVM ecosystem at this point. And the real issue is that there's no interoperability standard to interact between all those different chains currently.
Yeah, but even without interoperability, I mean, ultimately, there's a lot of the early applications in DeFi are not just making rational decisions with regard to EVM. It's also because these, people are kind of born and bred into the Ethereum and have a little bit more of a religious or fanatical or passionate rationale for building on EVM over maybe going elsewhere. But again, if it becomes undeniable in 5 or 10 years that Uniswap is just the DEX for everyone, you will likely see a Uniswap version on a Solana or an Avalanche or any other chain that is still there as well, right? And I think that's the iOS Android analogy that I'm always making is a lot of these arguments and conversations are just sort of pointless. If you have an incredibly successful app that everyone wants to use, it is going to be accessible to everyone everywhere. You're not going to just say, no, I'm not building over here and tapping into, a huge audience that would otherwise use your product if you were there. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's more of a starting point and a building block than it is sort of an end game, right? The end game is you have to build great products. And if you build great products, you're going to find a way to get those into everybody's hands, regardless of what chain they're in. Or, hopefully even better is what you mentioned, which is we finally have a really good interoperability standard, and it's pretty easy to move back and forth to the extent that the users themselves won't even really know what chain they're on. Mm-hmm. So, okay. Well, I think we're bumping up on time here, Joe. I appreciate you joining. I think anybody who wants to read more and see more of the charts and thoughts that Joey and the rest of the team have, again, please go to our blog, ar.ca/blog. You can find out more in addition to our website. You can reach us on Twitter or X, at ARCA, ARCA. You can find me, JDorman81, or you can find Joey and the rest of the team. Joey's at JReinberg13. And we'll keep the information and the analysis coming. So, Joey, thanks again for joining. And everyone else, we'll see you again next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.